Everyone tells you the same story about healing. Do the work, set boundaries, go to therapy. And one day, you'll wake up as this peaceful, enlightened version of yourself who floats through life unbothered. That's complete nonsense. Carl Jung studied what actually happens when empaths heal. And what he found? It's nothing like what you've been told. A healed empath doesn't become nicer. They become something that confuses everyone who knew them before. Something that makes old friends uncomfortable. Something that has their family asking, "What happened to you?" They don't lose their empathy. They just stop letting you weaponize it against them. They don't become cold. They become selective. And that selectivity looks like ice to people who were used to getting unlimited access. Here's what no one tells you. When an empath finally heals, they stop absorbing your emotions and start reflecting them back to you. They stop saving you from yourself. They stop explaining their boundaries. They just enforce them. Quietly, consistently, without apology. And the wildest part? They're not trying to be intimidating. They're just finally being honest. If you've ever been called cold for having boundaries, or selfish for choosing yourself, or told you've changed like it's an insult, this video is for you. Because yes, you have changed. And that's the entire point. Let's talk about what a healed empath actually becomes. Not what you think. What Jung proved. Before we can understand what a healed empath becomes, we must understand what they were required to kill. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Actually kill. Jung understood that psychological transformation is not addition. It is not about adding more love, more understanding, more compassion to your existing self. It is subtraction. It is death. It is the systematic dismantling of everything you built to survive in a world that was hostile to your nature. The unhealed empath constructed an elaborate survival mechanism, a false self that could interface with the world without hemorrhaging energy. This false self had specific characteristics. It smiled when it wanted to scream. It said yes when every cell screamed no. It absorbed abuse and called it sensitivity. It tolerated disrespect and called it compassion. This false self was not weak. It was actually extraordinarily strong. It took immense psychological energy to maintain that level of self-betrayal, to override your instincts every single day, to gaslight yourself more effectively than anyone else ever could. The beginning of healing for the empath is the moment they realize this false self must die, not be improved, not be healed, die. Jung called this the death of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear for society. For most people, the persona is just a social tool, something you put on for work, for family gatherings, for public spaces. But for the empath, the persona became the entire personality. The mask fused to the face. The process of removing that mask is not gentle. It is not gradual. It is violent. Think about what happens when you spend 30 years building an identity around being helpful, being understanding, being the person who always makes room for others. Your entire social value is constructed on that foundation. Your relationships exist because of that role. Your family needs you to be that person. Your friends expect it. Your partner relies on it. Now imagine deciding that person has to die. This is not a metaphor. When the empath begins the healing process, they must murder the part of themselves that made them acceptable. They must kill the good girl. They must execute the nice guy. They must assassinate the people pleaser. And what's left after that execution is raw, unfiltered, and deeply uncomfortable. Jung documented this phase in his patients repeatedly. He called it the encounter with the shadow. But for empaths, it's not just encountering the shadow. It's realizing that what you thought was your authentic self was actually the shadow wearing a halo. Your real self, the one that was buried, the one that was suppressed, the one that was deemed unacceptable, is angry. It's selfish. It's cold. It's judgmental. It sees through people. It wants revenge. It feels disgust. It has contempt for weakness. This is the self you've been hiding. Not because it's evil, because it's honest. The death that isn't death happens when the empath finally allows this buried self to breathe. They stop performing goodness and start embodying truth. They stop trying to be what others need and start expressing what they actually feel. This looks like regression to everyone watching. Your mother says you've become cold. Your partner says you've changed. Your friends say you're not the person they knew. They're right. You're not. That person is dead. And you killed them. Consciously. Deliberately. Because continuing to be them was its own form of death, just slower, quieter, more acceptable. Jung observed that patients who successfully navigated this death phase emerged different, not better, not healed in the conventional sense, different. They had access to parts of themselves they had quarantined for decades, the sharp tongue, the cutting observation, the ability to say no without explanation, the capacity to feel nothing for people they once would have died for. This is not healing as it's advertised. This is alchemy, the destruction of one substance to create another. And what emerges from that destruction is not prettier, it's truer. The healed empath is someone who killed their false self and learned to live as the person they were always afraid to be. Here is where the transformation becomes truly paradoxical. Because the healed empath does not become hard, they become simultaneously softer and more ruthless than they ever were before. This confuses people. They expect one or the other. Either you heal and become gentle, or you protect yourself and become guarded. But Jung understood that integration creates paradox, not resolution. The healed empath develops what can only be described as selective permeability. They are not open to everyone. They are not closed to everyone. They are exquisitely calibrated to respond to reality as it actually is, not as they wish it were. With people who are genuine, who show up authentically, who respect boundaries, the healed empath is more open than they ever were before. Because they're no longer afraid. They're no longer protecting themselves from their own inability to say no. They trust themselves completely to exit the moment something becomes toxic. This creates a depth of presence that is almost overwhelming. When a healed empath chooses to be with you, they are fully there, not half distracted by managing their own boundaries, not secretly resenting their lack of choice. They chose to be there, and that choice makes their presence feel more alive, more real, more valuable. But with people who are manipulative, who play games, who test boundaries, the healed empath becomes impenetrable. Not defensively, not reactively, simply impermeably. This is where the steel lives, in the complete absence of need. The unhealed empath needed approval, needed to be liked, needed to maintain connection at any cost. These needs made them controllable, made them exploitable, made them vulnerable to tactics that had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with emotional manipulation. The healed empath needs nothing from you, not your approval, not your understanding, not your agreement. This absence of need creates a psychological fortress that no manipulation can penetrate. Jung wrote about this extensively in his work on the individuation process. He observed that individuals who successfully separated from collective psychology, who stopped deriving their sense of self from external validation, became what he called contained. Their psychological center was internal, not external. For the empath, this shift is revolutionary, because they spent their entire lives with an external locus of control. They felt what you felt. They absorbed your emotions. Their internal state was dictated by the emotional atmosphere around them. Healing reverses this completely. The internal becomes primary. The external becomes information, not instruction. This is the softness and steel paradox. The healed empath feels more than ever. Their sensitivity has not diminished. If anything, it's more refined, more accurate, more penetrating. But that sensitivity no longer controls them. They feel everything and are moved by nothing that doesn't align with their truth. They can sit with someone in profound pain and offer deep compassion without taking on that pain. They can witness someone's rage without absorbing that rage. They can see someone's manipulation without feeling obligated to protect that person from the consequences of their choices. This creates an unsettling presence, because most people are used to empaths who mirror them, who absorb them, who respond to them. The healed empath does none of these things automatically. They choose. Every response is a choice. Every engagement is intentional. And that intentionality feels cold to people who are used to automatic empathy. It feels withholding to people who are used to unconditional availability. It feels cruel to people who are used to empaths sacrificing themselves to maintain connection. But it's not cold. It's not withholding. It's not cruel. It's simply conscious. And consciousness, as Jung knew, is always uncomfortable for those who prefer to remain unconscious. The paradox deepens when you realize that the healed empath's ruthlessness is actually a form of compassion, not for you, for themselves. They have learned that the most compassionate thing they can do is honor their own limits, that the kindest choice is often to walk away, that real love sometimes looks like refusal. This is not the love they were taught. This is not the compassion that gets praised. This is love that has been through fire and emerged as something entirely different, not opposite to compassion, but orthogonal to it. A love that says, I care about you, and I will not sacrifice myself to save you from yourself. Jung called this cruel compassion, the willingness to let people face their consequences, the refusal to enable, the capacity to say, I see your pain, and it's not my responsibility to fix it. The healed empath embodies this paradox, soft with the genuine, steel with the manipulative, open to truth, closed to games, deeply feeling, completely unmoved by tactics designed to control through emotion. They are not halfway between sensitive and strong. They are fully both, simultaneously, without contradiction. And that wholeness is what makes them impossible to categorize, impossible to predict, impossible to control. If there is one area where the healed empath's transformation is most visible, most radical, most uncomfortable for everyone around them, it is in how they relate to boundaries. The unhealed empath had no boundaries, or rather, they had boundaries that were so porous, so flexible, so easily overridden that they functioned more as suggestions than actual limits. You could call them at 3 a.m. You could dump your crisis on them without asking. You could take and take and take, and they would give and give and give, and then they would apologize for not giving more. This absence of boundaries was not generosity. It was self-abandonment. It was a learned behavior that said, my needs don't matter as much as yours. It was a survival strategy born from environments where having needs was dangerous. The healed empath doesn't fix this by building walls. They do something far more sophisticated. They alchemize their boundaries from defensive structures into expressions of selfhood. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, the ability to hold two opposites in tension until something new emerges. The healed empath's boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They're membranes that allow selective exchange. They're not barriers born from fear. They're expressions of self-knowledge. Let me show you how this works in practice. When the unhealed empath says no, it comes with explanation, justification, and apology. I can't help you move this weekend because I have this thing I committed to months ago, and I feel terrible, but I really can't cancel it. And I'm so sorry, but maybe I can help next weekend. This no is not really a number. It's a negotiation. It's an invitation for you to push back, to guilt trip, to make them feel bad enough that they override their own limit. When the healed empath says no, it sounds different. I'm not available. That's it. No explanation, no justification, no apology. The no is complete in itself. This terrifies people who are used to negotiating with empaths because there's nothing to push against. The boundary is not a position to be argued, it's a fact to be accepted. Jung understood that real boundaries are not defensive, they're definitional. They don't say, "Stay away from me." They say, "This is who I am." The healed empath's boundaries communicate their values, their limits, their non-negotiables. They're not protecting themselves from you. They're expressing themselves to you. This shift from defensive to definitional boundaries creates a strange effect. The healed empath becomes both more approachable and more intimidating simultaneously. More approachable because there's no hidden resentment. When they say yes, they mean it fully. When they engage, they're genuinely present. There's no passive aggression, no martyr complex, no secret scorekeeping. The slate is clean because they only allow interactions that honor their boundaries. More intimidating because you can't manipulate them. You can't guilt them. You can't use their empathy against them. The boundaries are clear, consistent, and completely non-negotiable. This clarity is unsettling to people who are used to finding loopholes in other people's limits. The alchemy of boundaries transforms the empath's entire relational reality. Relationships that were built on exploitation end, not through dramatic confrontation, through simple discontinuation. The healed empath stops showing up to dynamics that violate their boundaries. They don't announce it. They don't explain it. They just stop participating. This creates what Jung called active withdrawal, not running away, but consciously choosing where to invest energy. The healed empath withdraws from any dynamic where they must diminish themselves to participate. They remove their energy from relationships that require self-betrayal. They exit situations where their boundaries are treated as suggestions, and they do this without guilt. This is the crucial element. The healed empath has killed the part of themselves that felt guilty for having needs. They've integrated the understanding that boundaries are not selfish. They're structural. They're how you maintain your integrity in a world that constantly pressures you to fragment. What emerges from this alchemical process is something Jung called ethical individualism. The healed empath develops their own internal code of conduct, not based on what they were taught, not based on what others expect, based on what allows them to maintain their wholeness. This code is often more strict than social morality in some ways, and more lenient in others. The healed empath might refuse to tolerate disrespect for even a moment, but have no judgment about choices that society condemns. They might end a friendship over a single boundary violation, but remain completely open-minded about unconventional lifestyles. The logic is internal. The standards are personal. The boundaries serve the self, not the collective. This makes the healed empath unmanageable from a social control perspective. You cannot shame them into compliance. You cannot use social pressure to override their boundaries. You cannot leverage their empathy to make them sacrifice themselves. They have become sovereign. And sovereignty, as Jung knew, is always threatening to systems that require conformity to function. The healed empath's boundaries announce, "I am separate from you. I love you, and I am separate from you. I care about you, and I will not merge with you. I see your pain, and it is not my responsibility to fix it." This is the alchemy, taking the raw material of codependency and transmuting it into conscious relationship, taking the lead of people-pleasing and transforming it into the gold of authentic connection, taking the base metal of self-abandonment and forging it into the steel of self-possession. The boundaries of a healed empath are not defenses, they're declarations, and what they declare is simple. I exist, separate, whole, complete. I will connect with you, but I will not complete you. I will support you, but I will not save you. I will love you, but I will not lose myself in you. This is what healing creates, not walls, not openness, something new, something integrated, something that didn't exist before the transformation began. There is a shift that happens in the healed empath's perception that is so fundamental, so complete, that it changes their entire relationship with reality. Jung called it the development of the witness consciousness, the ability to observe your own psychological processes without being identified with them. For the unhealed empath, emotions were totalizing. When they felt something, they were that feeling. When they absorbed someone else's anger, they became angry. When they sensed someone's sadness, they became sad. There was no separation between the feeler and the feeling. This is what made them so vulnerable. Every emotion had complete authority. Every feeling demanded response. Every internal movement required action. The healed empath develops something different, a part of their awareness that can observe emotions without being consumed by them. This is not dissociation. This is not numbing. This is consciousness differentiating itself from its contents. Think of it like this. The unhealed empath was the ocean, tossed by every wave, moved by every current. The healed empath is simultaneously the ocean and the awareness watching the ocean. They feel the waves, they experience the currents, but there is something in them that remains unmoved, not untouched, but unmoved. Jung spent years developing techniques to cultivate this witness consciousness. He called it active imagination, the practice of observing your internal landscape with the same objectivity you might observe the external world. For empaths, this practice is revolutionary, because once you can witness your emotions, you can make choices about them. You can feel rage without acting on rage. You can sense manipulation without reacting to manipulation. You can perceive someone's pain without taking on that pain. This creates what looks like detachment from the outside. People say the healed empath has become cold, unfeeling, disconnected, but this is a profound misunderstanding. The healed empath feels everything they felt before. They simply no longer identify with those feelings as the totality of who they are. They can say, "I notice I'm feeling anxious," instead of, "I am anxious." They can observe, "There is sadness moving through me," instead of, "I am sad." This linguistic shift reflects a deeper psychological shift from being the emotion to hosting the emotion. The witness consciousness gives the healed empath something the unhealed empath never had: choice. Not the choice of whether to feel, but the choice of how to respond to what they feel. They can feel deep compassion for someone and still refuse to enable them. They can sense someone's emotional manipulation and simply observe it without taking the bait. They can perceive someone's need for attention and choose not to provide it. This creates a form of psychological freedom that is almost incomprehensible to people who are still identified with their emotions. Because for most people, feeling something means you must do something about it. If you feel guilty, you must make amends. If you feel obligated, you must fulfill that obligation. If you feel someone else's distress, you must alleviate it. The healed empath breaks this chain of causation. Feeling does not automatically lead to action. Perception does not automatically demand response. The witness consciousness creates a gap, a space between stimulus and response, and in that gap lives freedom. Jung observed that patients who developed this capacity experienced a profound shift in their relationships. They stopped being reactive. They became responsive. There's a difference. Reactive is automatic. Someone pushes your button and you react. Someone triggers your guilt and you comply. Someone activates your fear and you defend. Responsive is conscious. You feel the button being pushed and you choose whether to press it. You sense the guilt manipulation and you decide whether to engage. You notice the fear activation and you determine how to address it. The healed empath is almost entirely responsive and almost never reactive. Not because they've transcended their buttons, because they can watch themselves being triggered without being controlled by that trigger. This witness consciousness also transforms how the healed empath perceives others. They can see you clearly without taking on your emotional state. They can understand your pain without feeling obligated to fix it. They can recognize your manipulation without feeling angry about it. This creates an unsettling experience for people who interact with them, because the healed empath is present but not entangled. They're engaged but not enmeshed. They're listening but not absorbing. You can feel that they see you completely, maybe more clearly than anyone has ever seen you, but you also feel that they're not affected by you in the way they used to be. Your emotions don't move them the way they once did. Your needs don't automatically become their responsibility. This is the witness consciousness in action. Observing without merging, perceiving without absorbing, understanding without taking on. Jung believed this capacity was essential for individuation because you cannot become an individual while you're psychologically merged with everyone around you. You cannot know yourself while you're constantly experiencing yourself through others. The witness consciousness allows the healed empath to finally meet themselves, to observe their own patterns without judgment, to see their own tendencies without shame, to recognize their own needs without apologizing for them, and from this place of self-witnessing, they can finally make choices that serve their wholeness rather than their conditioning. They can see when they're about to people-please and choose differently. They can notice when they're about to over-explain and simply stop. They can observe when they're about to apologize for existing and refuse. This is what makes the healed empath so difficult to manipulate. They're watching themselves too closely to be taken by surprise. They notice their own vulnerabilities before you can exploit them. They see their own patterns before they become problems. The witness consciousness is not enlightenment. It's not transcendence. It's simply the capacity to be aware of your own awareness, to think about your thinking, to feel your feelings without being overwhelmed by them. And for the empath, this capacity changes everything. Here is what they don't tell you about healing. It cost everything, not money, not time, everything that made you acceptable, everything that made you safe, everything that allowed you to belong. Jung was clear about this. Individuation, the process of becoming a whole integrated self, requires you to separate from collective psychology, and that separation comes with a price that most people are unwilling to pay. For the healed empath, the price is particularly steep, because their entire identity was built on being needed. Their value was derived from their usefulness. Their place in the world was secured by their willingness to absorb everyone's overflow. When they heal, when they integrate, when they become whole, they lose that place. Not because anyone takes it from them, because they vacate it, consciously, intentionally, permanently. This means relationships end, not all of them, but many of them, most of them. The friendships that were built on you being the eternal listener, the family dynamics that required you to be the emotional regulator, the romantic partnerships that depended on you tolerating the intolerable. These relationships cannot survive your healing, not because you've become cruel, because you've become honest. And honesty is incompatible with dynamics that require one person to consistently betray themselves. Jung called this the sacrifice of the persona. But for empaths, it's more than sacrificing a mask. It's sacrificing an entire relational ecosystem. It's burning down the social structure you spent decades building. And here's what makes this particularly painful. You'll be blamed for it. The people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, of abandoning them, of not being the person they knew. They're right. You're not the person they knew. That person is dead. You killed them. Because being them was killing you. But they won't see it that way. They'll see your boundaries as rejection, your self-care as selfishness, your healing as betrayal. And they'll tell you so, loudly, often, with the exact emotional manipulation tactics that used to work. The healed empath must sit with this, must feel the accusation, must hear the blame, must watch relationships dissolve, must accept that becoming whole means becoming alone, at least for a while. This is the price, and it's not negotiable. You cannot heal and maintain every relationship. You cannot integrate your shadow and keep everyone comfortable. You cannot become whole and remain who they needed you to be. Jung observed this pattern in patient after patient. The ones who successfully individuated lost friends. They created distance from family. They ended marriages, not because they wanted to, because the old relationships couldn't hold the new person they were becoming. This creates a liminal space, a period between identities. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet fully who you're becoming. You're in transition, and transition is lonely. The unhealed empath filled every moment of silence with other people's noise. They never had to sit with themselves because they were always sitting with someone else's emotions. The healed empath must learn to be alone with themselves, fully, completely, without distraction. This is where many people abort the process. The loneliness becomes too much. The fear of isolation overrides the commitment to wholeness. They go back. They apologize for having boundaries. They resume the old role. They re-sacrifice themselves on the altar of belonging. But for those who stay the course, who endure the isolation, who refuse to trade their healing for company, something unexpected happens. New relationships emerge. Not many, but deep, real, reciprocal. These new relationships are not built on your utility. They're built on your authenticity. People are drawn to you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are. This is a completely different foundation. Jung wrote about this phenomenon extensively. He called it finding your tribe. But it's not about finding people like you. It's about finding people who can meet you at your level of integration. People who have done their own work. People who don't need you to save them. People who can love you without requiring you to diminish yourself. These relationships are rare, precious, worth the price of admission. But make no mistake, the price is steep. The healed empath must accept that they will be misunderstood, that their family might never get it, that old friends might speak badly of them, that they might spend years relatively alone before finding people who can match their frequency. This is what wholeness costs. Not everything you have, everything you thought you were. But here's the twist. What you lose was never really yours. The relationships that end were built on false pretenses. The identity you sacrifice was constructed from other people's expectations. The belonging you release was conditional on your self-betrayal. You're not losing anything real. You're shedding everything fake. And what remains, what emerges from that shedding, is the only thing that was ever truly yours, yourself. Jung called this the pearl of great price, the self, capital S, the integrated, whole, complete version of who you are. Finding it requires selling everything else, but once you have it, nothing can take it from you. The healed empath has paid this price. They've endured the loneliness. They've survived the isolation. They've sat with themselves in the dark and found that they were enough, more than enough. And from that place of enoughness, they no longer need what they once craved. They don't need constant company because they enjoy their own presence. They don't need validation because they've validated themselves. They don't need belonging because they belong to themselves. This self-sufficiency is not coldness, it's completion. And completion is magnetic. Once you stop needing, you start attracting. Not everyone, just your people. The ones who recognize wholeness when they see it. The ones who aren't threatened by your integration. The ones who celebrate your boundaries instead of testing them. These are the relationships waiting on the other side of healing. But you cannot access them until you've paid the price. Until you've let go of everyone who needed you to stay small. Until you've released every relationship that required your self-betrayal. The price of wholeness is everything that wasn't whole. And that's a price the healed empath has decided is worth paying. So what does a healed empath actually become? Not what you were promised. Not the serene spiritual teacher. Not the unconditionally loving presence. Not the person who finally learned to keep everyone comfortable while maintaining perfect boundaries. The healed empath becomes something harder to define. Something that resists easy categorization. Something that makes people uncomfortable precisely because it's so complete. They become someone who feels everything and is controlled by nothing. Someone who sees through your games and chooses not to play. Someone who loves deeply without losing themselves. Someone who can hold your pain without carrying it. Someone who honors their own limits more than your comfort. They become paradoxical, soft and ruthless, open and boundaried, compassionate and unmoved, deeply feeling and completely sovereign. They become conscious, awake to their own patterns, aware of their own triggers, witnessing their own processes, choosing their responses instead of reacting automatically. They become whole, not perfect, not healed in the sense of having no wounds, whole in the sense of owning every part of themselves, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the kindness and the capacity to walk away without looking back. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming undivided, of integrating all the parts you were taught to exile, of reclaiming everything you sacrificed to belong. And yes, it costs everything. Every relationship that required your self-betrayal, every identity that was built on other people's needs, every version of yourself that existed to make others comfortable. But what you gain is irreplaceable. You gain yourself, the real one, the one that was buried under years of conditioning, the one that knows its own truth and speaks it without apology, the one that needs nothing from anyone and therefore can love freely, without agenda, without desperation. The healed empath is not nicer, they're truer. And truth, as Jung knew, is always more uncomfortable than niceness. If you recognize yourself in this transformation, if you're in the middle of this process right now, if you're paying the price of wholeness and wondering if it's worth it, comment "whole" below. Let it be your declaration that you're choosing yourself over comfort, truth over belonging, integration over acceptance. Subscribe to Psyche Core for more explorations of Jung's psychology and the reality of transformation that no one else is willing to tell you about. Because healing is not what they sold you. It's harder, it's lonelier, it's more expensive, but it's also more real, more powerful, more yours. The healed empath is not the person you were promised you'd become. They're the person you were always meant to be once you stopped betraying yourself to belong. That's the truth Jung discovered. That's the transformation he documented. That's what a healed empath actually becomes. Not what you think, what you need to be.